Ken's left his pad up here, so I'm going to learn Osia's deepest, darkest secrets, I think. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session focused on harnessing the shipbuilding opportunities associated with the offshore renewable sector. As Rex and John, and I think pretty much every speaker so far has reflected, offshore is one of the biggest priorities for both the NSO and the shipbuilding enterprise for growth as well. Over the next hour or so, we're going to do a quick offshore renewables baton relay with each speaker passing to the next. And at the end, we should have about 20 minutes for a panel session, so do get your thinking caps on and post your questions on the event app, or get ready to use those roving mics again. First, I'm going to say a bit more about what the NSO's work is doing in this area, some initial reflections that we've made so far, and some of our immediate priorities. Since the strategy was published, within the NSO, we've ramped up our engagement with the offshore renewables sector to understand the market barriers and what needs to be done across the enterprise to address them. We recognise that this opportunity could be genuinely transformative for commercial shipbuilding in the UK, and you'll shortly be hearing more about the scale of the opportunity, but to put it in a little bit of context, the cross-government shipbuilding pipeline, as I spoke about earlier today, features over 150 vessel types over the next 30 years. Analysis by the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult shows that to serve UK waters alone, around 114 service operation vessels will be required in the same time period. That's not even including the hundreds of crew transfer vessels that will be required and vessels associated with the burgeoning tidal market. So, to put it mildly, the prize is big. But for the offshore wind developers, vessels are much further down their supply chain. Given the current pressures around energy prices, their focus is on keeping costs down. Yes, UK content matters, but there has to be a compelling proposition to choose UK shipbuilding. While we have capability in the CTV market and a strong base to build from, it's a highly competitive marketplace with challenges still to be overcome. When it comes to SOVs, we're trying to break into a new market where the UK shipbuilding industry has to demonstrate it can deliver. The NSO is focused on understanding the incentives at play and ensuring a joined-up government response to addressing market barriers. Some examples of our initial priorities so far: engaging with the wider OR enterprise, particularly the developer community, to raise the profile of UK shipbuilding. Exploring how we can incentivise developers to prioritise UK shipbuilding, whether that's through their supply chain plans or through the licensing process. Working with ORIC, the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, who are conducting analysis on our behalf to develop a shipbuilding pipeline for offshore renewables vessels to help you mobilise ahead of these opportunities. ORIC are also conducting a cost baselining exercise for SOVs, so we can understand how the UK compares against international competitors. And you'll hear later this afternoon in one of the next sessions about the Zero Emission Vessel and Infrastructure Scheme ZEVI, which offers a significant pot of funding. With minimising emissions being a big priority for customers in the ORE vessel market, ZEVI is the ideal opportunity for developing demonstrators for SOVs and CTVs. But success in this market is fundamentally a question of competitiveness, and government can't break down all the barriers alone. We need to see the shipbuilding industry respond. We need you to be proactively engaging customers and building their confidence and investing the time, effort and resource to win these contracts. Many of you, particularly in the CTV market, already are. We need to be working together to address the shared challenges. There could well be opportunities for collaboration given the scale and volume of orders. This will be an area for the SEG to explore, but we need to see industry leading the way. And there is more support out there. You'll shortly be hearing from Andy MacDonald, Programme Manager for the Offshore Wind Growth Partnership, who will highlight the offer from the OWGP and Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult. Please do think about how they can support your business. We'll then hear from John Davis from BP, who have aspirations to build 2 SOVs here in Scotland. This goes to show that the opportunity is here and now, and the shipbuilding sector needs to respond quickly. BP are conducting a feasibility study into green SOVs, and Lauren Hadnam from OREC, who are leading the study alongside the high-value Manufacturing Catapult and Scottish universities, will share some early findings and highlight how the shipbuilding sector can engage. The NSO has co-funded part of this study so that its findings can be made accessible across the sector to help the UK shipbuilding sector capitalise on the work BP are doing to lead the way in this new market. And finally, as I trailed at the start, you'll have the opportunity to ask our speakers some questions. So throughout the presentations, please use the conference app to get your questions down and in. I'll now pass over to Andy MacDonald from the Offshore Wind Growth Partnership.
Thank you, Rod, and thank you for inviting me to come along today. It's always a pleasure to come to an event which is kind of a slightly different sector. I just sit here and I'm in awe of everything that's going on, so it's great. And hopefully I can give you a wee bit of a flavour of what's happening in the offshore wind sector, which has been an incredible journey over the last 10 years. That's fine. I'm Andy MacDonald. I'm Director of Development and Operations at the Catapult. So I look after a team of about 50 engineers, looking after floating wind, O&M and supply chain growth. So those are the kind of areas. We've got about 300 people overall within the organisation. I'll talk a bit about that and how, with my other hat on, the Offshore Wind Growth Partnership, there's opportunities to support the shipbuilding sector as well. So keen to get onto that. I've been in the sector for 10 years now, and it's the phenomenal growth. It's kind of hard to kind of capture. But when I started 10 years ago in the sector, we were looking at aspirationally 10 gigawatts by 2020. But we were working with 3.6 megawatt turbines and prices about £150 per megawatt hour. And that's just shifted at a phenomenal speed. So 5 years ago, we were starting to look at the possibility of using 10 megawatt turbines, and we were starting to get that cost down below £100. Then 3 years ago, the target was moved to 30 gigawatts by 2030. 2 years ago, it was moved to 40 gigawatts by 2030. Last year, it was moved to 40 gigawatts, and actually now it's up to 50 gigawatts. And it's interesting to see the drivers of those, because those have changed, and it's, if you're interested in the sector, it's worth watching what those drivers are, because originally it was all about economic growth. That moved on to really looking at net zero when the costs came down, recognising that offshore wind could be a fundamental part of the electrification of the energy system. As costs came down, net zero became the next driver that really pushed offshore wind. That's then since moved again, particularly with the invasion in Ukraine, and energy security is now moving up, and deployment targets are moving up, not just in the UK, but across Europe and across the rest of the world. And what that means is that things have then flipped around full cycle, and actually the supply chain is now a potential bottleneck. So where before we were pushing about economic growth and getting companies to develop, we're now seeing that we need to be supporting companies because there isn't actually the capacity to deliver the targets that we're looking at. So we're going through this roller coaster, but I'll show you some of the numbers in a second. But it's phenomenal the way it's growing, and huge opportunities for this sector that I hope you'll engage with us around. Briefly, I've talked about the Catapult and what we do, but we're part funded by UK government. And we've got about 300 staff, but the most important thing we have is the assets and the engineers that we have and the understanding of the sector. And we're here to support companies through that knowledge, through those test facilities and the domain expertise that we can bring to other sectors as well. So we're here to support you predominantly through that engineering and technology lead side of things. But we take that, it's not just the technology and engineering, it's also about company development, and I'll talk about on the growth partnership side of things how we can support you with that competitiveness side as well. This is a picture that kind of captures a lot of what we do. This is our facility down in Blythe, and it's really to give you an idea of the scale of what we do. We've got a number of docks which are suitable for a lot of marine testing. The building top right is the blade test 2 hole. So we're currently testing 107 metre blades. We're looking to expand that to test 120 metre blades over the next couple of years. We've got a drivetrain facility currently testing up to 15 megawatts. Again, that's going up to 20 megawatts. And then we've got some smaller test facilities there. up to 3 megawatt drivetrains, which could be used for marine propulsion type testing as well. A lot of expertise on high voltage cables, which is the building bottom left, which is the Charles Parson building. So we've got a huge array of different assets, and we're setting up a new facility up in Aberdeen, specifically to look at floating wind, dynamic cables and moorings. We also have a centre down in Grimsby, and just wanted to make sure I got some pictures of vessels into my presentation. So there's a couple of Ørsted's SOVs down there. This is the Ørsted control centre at the front there. RWE are just off to the picture, off to the left as well. But we've got a centre there very much focusing on clean maritime, and we'll hear from Lauren, who supports the work of the facility down in Grimsby. But that's where we're focusing our O&M and our clean maritime activity. Never miss an opportunity to put a picture of a big turbine on the screen. This is actually the previous Prime Minister with the yellow hat on there, so it's quite recent. But it's really just to give you a size of the scale of the turbine there. So that's the Haliade X turbine. So when you think of these in the middle of the North Sea, on top of a 150-metre tower, that's what we're talking about. So, and when we look at that and we look at it in the concept of shipbuilding, we need to consider the installation and the O&M, as well as just the engineering that goes into the turbine itself. So to get back to the numbers, I talked about the kind of phenomenal growth. And this graph is really showing the kind of global position. So until 2 years ago, the UK was the leader in terms of deployment. It's now been outstripped by China, and China will continue to have a very, very strong growth in that area. But we're also seeing huge growth in Europe, and we're seeing the US really stepping up. And their recent activity, the IRA Act, has really pushing what they're doing in the sector as well. So there's opportunities for exports, as well as there are opportunities for collaboration across the globe. But the market is growing and growing. And when we're talking about the scale that we've got, and the UK's got just over 10 gigawatts at the moment, the global installation will move from about 20 gigawatts a year to over 30 gigawatts a year in the next 10 years. So the year-on-year growth is continuing to grow, as well as the cumulative number of installed turbines there as well. So what does that kind of mean, I guess, in terms of vessel demand? There's a couple of kind of key takeaways from this. So the increased deployment means there's increased activity, both from the installation side, but it also means there's more O&M activity, which means there's more vessels, and we'll hear about the demands for SOVs from John and Lauren as well. But that kind of deployed capacity is important, but also that rate of installation means that installation vessels are needed as well, and there's huge growth there. So that pure rate of increase is driving the demand. But there's also changes in the nature of what's happening as well. So we're seeing as wind farms are moving further offshore, and in the graphic there, the green ones are the installed ones. The blue and the black ones are planned wind farms. So you can see that we're moving further and further offshore, fairly extensively, and that means that the O&M strategy is moving from using CTVs to SOVs, so having the crew at sea for longer periods and actually working from sea rather than coming to shore, and a kind of CTV strategy. So that strategy is an important shift that's happening. The SOVs will still have daughter craft coming off them, or CTVs associated with them, so there's still a market for those smaller craft, even though you're moving to an SOV model. And finally, on the horizon, we've got floating wind, and floating wind is set to grow and grow in terms of its percentage, and enables access to more and more areas of sea. So we're seeing that the picture bottom right, I'm not sure if you can see it, is a picture of the fabrication of 3 of the principal power platforms, and it's really just to give an idea of scale. And I think there's huge synergies between shipbuilding and the platforms used for floating wind. So it's another one worth investigating as well. Lauren will cover this in a bit more detail, but the kind of SOV, the demand for SOVs, to give you some ideas of numbers. We've done some early studies. We're looking to do some more studies to kind of refine these numbers. Rod was talking about 114 SOVs for the European market by 2030. We've kind of got a range of 62 to 150, so it could be much higher even than the numbers that Rod's talking about. On CTVs, we're somewhere between 275, 414 is our kind of latest forecast. We will be refining those as we understand a bit more about the project. But huge growth, huge opportunity. And just in round numbers, that's 10 to 20 SOVs a year over the next decade. That's between 20 and 40 CTVs per year. You know, so big numbers in terms of big opportunity. So really coming to the heart of the matter in terms of what you're interested in, how can Catapult and the Growth Partnership support you? So Catapult, as I've explained, we have our facility design engineers, we have the research capability, and we're delighted to work with you, to partner with you in the way that we're doing with BP on different projects to take forward new technology. So that research, that test and validation, and the commercialization that goes around that, because there's no point doing that research, building up that capability, if we can't convert that into real business and real commercialization. So that's something that Catapult is absolutely focused on. We have a number of supply chain programs that complement the innovation programs that we run on the research side. So we have a program called Launch Academy, which is a traditional accelerator program, taking startups, micro businesses, and taking them through a business improvement process. We have the Fit for Offshore Renewables program, which was developed from the nuclear sector, but is about getting companies ready to bid for work and take it forward, and the Offshore Wind Growth Partnership, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail. But if any of these, the Fit for or the Launch Academy, is of interest and you think it could help you as a company, then do get in touch and we'll explain a bit more about that. But that's the wrap that we put around the research and engineering capabilities that we have to help companies to take that forward. In terms of the Offshore Winds Growth Partnership, it's a program that's funded by industry, and we actually spun it out as a separate company specifically to run the supply chain side of what we do. So it's a program that came out of the offshore wind sector deal, which was an agreement between industry and government committing to auction rounds going forward, and industry committing to supporting supply chain growth going forward. And it's funded by OIC members, so the developers, and delivered by Catapult. And it does two things, and it's important to put those together. So one is it does provide grant funding. I'll talk about that in a second. The other is about business transformation, which is about helping companies to improve what they're doing, both through competitiveness and capability. And we've learned a lot from the aerospace sector in terms of how we run some of those programs to actually help companies to move forward. Often companies come to us and the first thing they're asking is about the funding. It's very, very helpful sometimes for companies to go through the business transformation and then come back and ask for the funding. We often find we get better applications and better engagement at that point. So the two sides of what the Growth Partnership does is the grant funding side, and we do innovation grants from sort of 100K, from 25K to 100K, so short, sharp type projects, and we do development grants, which are more about investing in the business, which can be up to £1 million. And then on the business transformation side, we've got a program called West, which could well be very supportive in terms of some of the companies here. It provides about 10 days of consultancy support, but very specific domain expertise, which would help companies either understand the market, understand the sector, understand exports, understand the business planning. So it's short, sharp, but using experts from the sector. We've got a set of 8 consultancies who run that for us, but they're market specific and very, very knowledgeable about both the UK and the global market. And then the Sharing and Growth Programme is for larger companies, and that's very much about embedding people into companies to help them improve their competitiveness. And again, potentially that's something that could be open to companies here. We're looking for companies that have over 40 staff and turnovers of kind of 5 million plus, because you need to be big enough to be able to absorb that kind of education and the program associated with that. So that's what the Growth Partnership can do. if you put that together with what Catapult can do and some of the things Lauren will talk about in terms of the research and technology, hopefully that's something that's of use to yourselves to move things forward. So if you do have any questions, happy to take them during part of the panel session, or come and speak to me afterwards, or find a way of getting in touch. We're always delighted to speak to new companies and see how we can help. So thank you very much, and look forward to the questions. Thank you. I'll pass on to John and let him give his presentation, and we'll come back for questions after Lauren. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Davis. I work for BP EnBW. We're a joint venture. EnBW is a German utilities company, which is Energy Baden-Württemberg. They're based in Karlsruhe in Germany, and they, with BP, won a joint venture award for 3 wind farm developments: Morgan, Mona and Morven, M3. We try and acronym everything. And Morgan and Mona are on the west coast of England, and Morven is off the coast of Aberdeen, about 60 nautical miles off Aberdeen. Now, Morgan and Mona was a straight wind farm. You write the biggest check, we'll give you the contract. Morven was, through ScotWind, part of the 28 gigawatts package that the Scottish Government handed out about 18 months ago, and part of the bid where BP EnBW won that was through Scottish content, and the companies have undertaken to build 2 SOVs and 2 CTVs in Scotland. As well as that, Scottish content has to run throughout the whole system, from the personnel on board the ships, through the technicians, through the jackets, gravity-based systems. Absolutely everything has to be based either in Scotland or have Scottish content. Nobody's quite written down what Scottish content means yet, but we're working way up to that. We have to ask first, and then the Scottish Government usually say yes or no. So I came into the company about 10 months ago. I'd come from decommissioning FPSOs, putting them on station, coming back again in that nasty oil and gas business, and before that, a lot of defence time. So when I started in June last year, I was told about this. Right, John, you're building 2 ships in Scotland, SOVs and CTVs. So I was a little biased. I smiled sweetly. I said, do you want a black and white one or do you want a grey one? And nobody really understood where we were coming from. So what we need to do now is we've got the ambition and the opportunity to start building something different up in Scotland, here in Scotland. As a great RN officer said a few hours ago, the best thing to do then is the first bit of work, you've got a blank piece of paper, is go and find someone else to do something. So what we did was we spoke to our Catapult and said what we need to be able to do is also decarbonise, to justify ourselves as a former oil and gas company, now an energy company, and state that we can either get to zero emissions or be as close to. So we commissioned Lauren and her team, and as Rod said earlier, that the National Shipbuilding Office gave us some money. I think we would have shared it anyway, but it's kind of you to come in with us and hand over some money for phase 1. And what we will be doing is talking about green technology, so that when we are ready to build these vessels in about 2 or 3 years' time, what is the cutting edge of technology that we can put on those ships that will go through the next 15 years. These are 60-year wind farms, so we're going to have 3, 4, 5 iterations of these SOVs and CTVs in field for the next 60 years from 2029. What we do not want to do is effectively pick the Betamax version of green energy, because if we pick, for example, ammonia and nobody else does, we will end up buying a number of ships or chartering a number of ships where nobody else wants them and they're worthless in a few years, which is why we need those. So I'd like to introduce Lauren. She's going to talk about what she's been doing on our behalf, and as you say, any questions after this, feel free to come and ask me or come and find me later on. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lauren Hadnam and I'm the Clean Maritime Manager at the ORE Catapult. The Clean Maritime team at the Catapult support the offshore wind sector in a number of ways. So we work, and one of the projects we're going to talk about today is particularly focusing on vessel technology. We also support ports and infrastructure and also look at some quite exciting technology developments in offshore charging as well. So I will start by saying, although the offshore wind industry is overwhelmingly positive in its impact on decarbonisation, the vessels which support the O&M phase of the life cycle in particular do still use hydrocarbon fuels, so clear opportunity for improvement in a sector which both supports and understands the benefit of green technologies. It's also an industry which, as you've talked about earlier, through the bid process and CFDs, develops supply chain plans and monitors and promotes UK content. So we were very pleased to hear the announcement from BP and EMBW that they were looking to develop vessels that were both built in Scotland and also looking at cleaner technology options at the same time, which led to ORE developing the project plan that we're going to talk about today. So first and foremost, I'm going to say I'm sharing the work today, which was done by a team of absolutely excellent researchers. So it's not just ourselves at the ORE Catapult. It's been supported, as we've talked about, by the National Shipbuilding Office, by BP and by EMBW. And also we've got the MTC, so SAIS that are in the audience today. They understand a lot about manufacturing technologies and how they might apply to shipbuilding, and also the supply chain development and supply chain companies in the UK who could support on that. The University of Edinburgh, who have been supporting us with some fuel research they've done and building on some novel fuel technology work that they've done in the university up till now, and also the University of Strathclyde, building on a lot of naval architecture experience that they've got there. And our role as OREC is really about integrating that and bringing it into the offshore wind market context and understanding the operational profile for these vessels. Okay, now I know Andy's shared this, but just to quickly cycle back to this, because I think it's absolutely critical to the context of why we find this project so important. So there is a huge opportunity for these vessels for UK shipbuilding. Offshore wind is still a rapidly expanding industry. I think people are starting to think of it as slightly mature, but I think we're quite away from that yet. And we're still seeing major technology developments in the industry, as Andy's mentioned. Between 62 and 149 vessels will be required in European waters by 2030, and up to 309 SOVs by 2050. But at the same time as this opportunity, there are major challenges. So none of the SOVs that we've seen in UK waters today were built in the UK, and none of them utilise zero emissions propulsion technology. So we are going into this project understanding that there is a big challenge involved in getting us to that place, and we want to go into that very open-eyed and understand what we need to do and what technologies could support the development of that. So the aim of this project then was a really holistic look at all of the requirements, gaps and potential technology solutions, which will enable us to develop and deploy greener SOVs from the UK. So the first work package we looked at is done by the team at ORE, and that's looking at legislation and regulation. So there's two main strands of work we're looking at here. The first is government policy, so understanding how things like carbon pricing, technologies and mandatory targets might change moving forward and might enable some of these vessels or disincentivise the existing fleet. And also looking at the route to certification, particularly for greener technologies. There is a large challenge about getting these things through the MCA and others, and we want to understand what does that timeline look like, how can we work to proactively develop some of those standards and what actions can be taken now. Energy sources, this has been done by the University of Edinburgh, so there's been loads of projects which are looking at new fuels, and we do recognise that the vessel technology itself is only one part of this. It's not particularly useful if you develop a new vessel and then you can't get the appropriate refuelling or recharging infrastructure at the port. So we want to take a look at what are local to the projects that John's talked about, what are the energy sources, what is the potential production routes for that, and what's the likely cost for those at point of port, how do we store that at port, and how do we refuel, what's that process. The next one is vessel technology. I'm going to cover this very quickly because I'm going to talk to you about it in more detail in a slide's time. This has been done by the University of Strathclyde team, and the aim here really is to look at the fuel and propulsion choices primarily. Emissions, so we talk an awful lot about emissions out of tailpipe, but what we wanted to understand, and particularly with new technologies like battery, is what's the potential impact through the whole of the life cycle for these vessels, and including the fuel production routes. Again, there's no point changing a vessel technology, spending a lot of money on capex, and then replacing it with an equally polluting fuel. And last but not least, the supply chain work package. So the team at the MTC are doing that. Si, I'm going to ask you to give a little wave, if you don't mind. This is Si. Please speak to him over the next couple of days. We're really keen to hear from you if you have technologies that you think should be included in this study, or if you'd like to understand a little bit more about what we're doing in the supply chain package. Generally, really what the aim of this is to understand what we have the potential to do in the UK and what we need to develop to do this better in the UK. Okay, so what technologies are we considering? So we've looked at 7 fuels, which you can see in the top left of the slide there. And they range from drop-in fuels, so things like biodiesel, closer to drop-in like LNG, and then to totally new fuels, so hydrogen, ammonia, and hybrids of all of the above. When you combine that with the propulsion choices that might be a part of this, and happy to send these slides out as well if anybody would like any of them, we will disseminate all this. When you combine this with all of the propulsion choices, we looked at 15 scenarios, and that includes traditional ICEs and electrical configurations, including generators, battery propulsion, and fuel cells. Again, the aim of this really was to assess this without in an unbiased manner, so without having what we thought the right answer was in mind. And with that in mind, we did want to quite openly share that when we did a piece of work assessing the technologies against the technical, environmental, economic, safety and fuel availability, rather unsurprisingly actually today, a lot of the technologies that we are seeing on vessels did come out at the top. So LNG scored really well, electric scored well as well, which we're pleased to see, and then also biodiesel. This is reflective of the lower barriers to entry for these fuels in terms of technical availability and certainty over fuel availability. However, LNG and biodiesel particularly we didn't consider for further study for a few reasons. Coming back to the aim of the project, our aim really was to understand what are the technology options, so we felt there was very little technical merit in looking at in much detail about the configurations for those ships. Biodiesel is chemically identical, and then LNG, that technology is available and on the market. So we thought we could probably push ourselves a little bit further. There is lack of production and port availability in Scotland, and in biodiesel in particular we think there's going to be real competition for availability of that. There's obviously a residual environmental impact, so these are net zero fuels as opposed to true or absolute zero fuels. And then there is policy suggesting that actually biosource fuels are not preferred for maritime usage. There's many reasons for this, but one of which is competition from other sectors, including aerospace, which might have less options and be willing to pay a higher price for fuel. Okay, so based on this down selection, we are now developing 3 concepts a little bit further. So I should say the project runs out to May, so we're just in the process of deciding this now, and we will get down to one final solution which we think is the best or the preferred option. The first one is the one that scored highest of the more novel. So this is battery electric architectures with a methanol backup. This scored well in the initial assessment, as I said, but there's still some major challenges in this design, including high initial capex cost of batteries, the need for in-field charging for some of the operational profile, and also the potential life of the batteries themselves. We had a hydrogen fuel cell architecture. Hydrogen scored the best of the novel fuels, but with that being quite novel, there comes concern about the technical maturity, and also there is still a very high cost for green hydrogen, and production facilities for that are obviously limited at the moment. And last but not least, an ammonia architecture. We are still assessing the merits of ICE or electrical propulsion here, and we want to understand the major safety challenges around containment of leaks and particularly with the toxicity of ammonia, how that could be dealt with on a vessel which houses hundreds of workers. We're also looking in detail at the supply chain. So to do this, we've broken down, I'm going to call it a typical, there's no such thing, but a typical SOV into the major sub-assemblies, and we're looking at the potential of the UK supply chain to assess these based on capabilities today. Again, I'll point to Si here. He's here today and tomorrow. If you think you want to be on the list I'm just about to show you, please shout to him. If you think there's any technologies we should be aware of that we've not mentioned today, again, please also raise the flag. Right, this is a video, so fingers crossed here. Oh, it's worked. Perfect. Okay, so again, this map is a work in progress, but we've already identified over 100 UK organisations who could support the opportunity for SLV supply in the UK. On hulls and superstructures, there's only a few which can deliver these typically 80 metres plus vessel, which we're looking at in this study. There's 2 in Scotland, one included Versailles, who were kind enough to host us yesterday, Camel Laird, Harland and Wolf Ferguson's and others, and other people who are also capable of major hull assembly. The propulsion technologies we've looked at are largely centred on existing technologies, but we are looking to expand that, and there is opportunities around fuel cells and batteries. On daughter craft, we've seen actually more success in the CTV market than the SOV market, and that's reflected by a really good market for daughter craft in the UK and potential for opportunities of people who supply those technologies. And in what we're calling other major assembly items, but are still really high value pieces of technology, including cranes, comms equipment, deck equipment, accommodation. Again, really good spread of companies across the UK with the potential to supply into that. So while we recognise there's a challenge about delivering these vessels, we do think there is a significant opportunity for the UK and potential to supply not just at the top level, but also into major assemblies. And we've estimated that this could equate to 500 UK jobs by 2050. Last but not least, last slide. So we are aiming to finish this project by the end of May, so time is quite tight, but still plenty of time and opportunity to get in touch. We'd like to hear from you if you have the ability to deliver any of this technology, components, or you have any skills relevant to SOV build that you think you'd like to know about. We will be publishing this map and sharing this map. Please do get in touch, and we will make sure that the email addresses I've put on the slide here for myself and Si are shared around as well. If you think you should be on that map, please shout. We're also really interested to have a conversation if you have any queries, comments on today's presentation, would either like any more info or have any questions on what you've seen, and obviously we've got a session for some questions here. Or finally, if you'd like to be included in dissemination of project outcomes, which we will be doing in May and beyond. So I'll put the email addresses on screen, and I will make sure these slides are sent out. Okay, so just to say thank you, first and foremost actually to BP, EMBW and the NSO for supporting this piece of work. We really hope this enables both meaningful delivery of the two vessels we've talked about in terms of SOVs, but also potentially future production of 10, 15, 30 years. So thank you for your time, and I'm open to any questions.
So thank you very much to Lauren and to all our speakers. For reference as a self-confessed grey mandarin, the thought of handling an iPad, a phone, timekeeping and questions all in one go has instilled quite a great deal of fear in me, but I'm about to do my best. And also, I just want to check, I reckon we're a bit behind, about 10 minutes or so for questions?
You've got at least 15 minutes.
15. And the iPad at that stage switched itself off. So, John, you already touched upon this, I think, very much in your presentation. But one of the questions is, why specifically is the build requirement in Scotland and not the rest of the UK? I think what really came through in your presentation, that some of this has been driven by the requirement set. But if you can maybe expand a bit more on your experience of that and how much it's driven by that content requirement and how you found that would be really helpful.
Absolutely, I can try. Well, part of the whole ScotWind piece was that, as I said, is we had to win a beauty contest. We had to put a lot of Scottish content in, and one of the main things that made us different was we were the only ones who promised to build in Scotland. Now, I don't think that was a foolish move. It was made by the guy who hasn't turned up today, so that was a bit of a pity. But it was to be frank, it was quite a surprise to me that we were willing to make that commitment straight off. And when I turned up last year, it was oh really? But what has happened in the last 7 or 8 months has been quite remarkable, is the change in attitudes that I've seen from not necessarily vessel operators, but particularly the shipyards, and certainly within the CTV market. I know we're not really talking about CTVs today, but the CTV market has suddenly, probably in the last 3 months, just leapt ahead with, we're going to be building in Scotland. When do you want it? Do you want it a week on Thursday? So I'm looking at 2029. We've got CTVs that are fully electric, fully green, that can be built in Scotland within 2 years, which I think is a remarkable leap. Now, the rest of the Scottish content that we're seeing is support for logistics. We haven't chosen our ops and maintenance East Coast port yet, whether it be somewhere like Aberdeen, Peterhead, Montrose, Dundee, but we're working at those being fully green, Scottish, But we want to make sure that the lorries that arrive, the trains that arrive, everything is green, because it's all well and good for us to say we're going to be green with this bit, but if we then pour 25,000 tonnes of concrete down, we've got to make sure that's coming from green energy as well.
Thank you. And I promise I'm not going to make you hog the mic, but just to expand on another question, which is, and this is quite awkward for you to comment on your competitors, but what more do you think fellow developers can do to create opportunities for UK shipbuilders?
Come and talk to us. Yeah, it's about cooperation. We as developers, you've got oil and gas or historic oil and gas companies come into the wind sector, and you've got some companies who are already here. But what we're not doing yet at our developer level is cooperating and talking. I need 2, maybe 3 SOVs, I think, for my project, but I know of 3 or 4 who need 2 or 3 as well. So I could probably get to 10 or a dozen in Scotland, so we need to be able to talk. We're starting to get there. There's a couple of acronyms that are getting together, and we'll be able to talk, but it's that point of cooperation and saying we're going to pick a design, we're going to pick not necessarily one yard, but the one design that we can go forward from 2027, 28 onwards. As I said, we've got 60 years of this just within our fields, and ScotWind 4, so that's 30 gigawatts, that's about a dozen vessels.
Thank you. And I'm going to pick up quickly and briefly one of the questions that's been asked of me directly about there needing to be a compelling message for UK builders and what's not compelling. Just to clarify, I wasn't talking about the builders, I was actually talking about the offshore wind developers, and that they need to have clarity of why they should go with UK builders as well, and what the offer is from UK shipyards, as opposed to it being the UK builders that need convincing. Hopefully, through all the presentations today, the opportunity has really shone through. And
can I say one
sure.
thing then? Is what we're not being, I think we are being a little disingenuous, is it's not we're building in Scotland because we have to, it's wholly because we want to. I walked into a shipyard when I was 19, I think, and I've been hanging around the places ever since. But it's that whole point is what we have been very good at is building one-offs. But it's this pipeline that we need to move forward to, which I think is a new thing.
Thank you. I'll give you a break for a minute. So, Lauren, on the theme of repeatability driving shipbuilding efficiency, do you see any merit in development of a scalable SOV based on true modular construction? That is quite a question.
Simply yes is the way too easy answer. We talk a lot about standardisation, you've mentioned it there. There's obviously, and I think one of the exciting things about this opportunity, Ken mentioned it earlier in his presentation, with rate comes the potential to be more cost competitive. I think we definitely need to take advantage of that, and that definitely comes with technology development and implementation. There is a lot of conversation around, you talked about a standard design there. When we see people like Damen and companies who are doing this today, they tend to have more of an option list, for lack of a better way of putting it, so designs you can pick from. I think moving to something like that, there's always going to be mod standards for these type of things. You will need specific equipment, they will have slightly different crew requirements, but moving to something as standard as we can get it, I think absolutely offers big opportunities, yeah.
Thank you. And I'll also tick off one directly for you, Andy, as well. Do you think we've reached the practical limit to offshore wind turbine size output?
No. I remember when we built a blade test 2 that I was showing you the picture of. We built a 100-metre test, and people laughed at us and said, 100 metres, why do you need that? And we're now having to build a new test shed to build a 120-metre blade. So I have huge faith in the ingenuity of engineering in the sector. And, I think we'll certainly get up to 20-megawatt turbines. Whether we get beyond that, I think it probably gets a bit harder. But, no, absolutely, the turbines are getting bigger and bigger. And it's a problem for the supply chain. And it's a problem for the turbine OEMs because it costs a lot to develop a new platform. And there's quite a lot of discussion in the sector as to is there a way of kind of capping that so as to actually enable the supply chain to catch up, because every time we move to larger turbines, you need larger blade manufacturing facilities, you need larger tower manufacturing facilities, monopiles, all the rest of it. And also in the shipbuilding side, bigger and bigger vessels, and that becomes a problem. So there's an argument that actually it should be capped. From an engineering perspective, I have huge faith in engineers that will get bigger and bigger, and it will keep ahead of any regulator that tries to stop it.
Thanks very much. I'm going to group a couple of questions together and invite anybody on the panel to comment on this. So the first is that the UK is new to the SOV market. So what is the SOV of the future going to look like, and how do we as UK PLC differentiate ourselves? And perhaps a linked question or point is what role for autonomous systems to help meet the demand for OR and accompanying support ecosystem. So invite anybody with any views on the future of the SOV market.
I'll just briefly comment on the autonomous systems side, and that as we develop and seek to develop more and more sites, consenting is a huge bottleneck for the sector. Anything that we can do to use autonomous survey vessels to actually gather data faster over very large areas is something that I think we need and will be needed in the UK, but also other countries. So I think that those autonomous vessels is something that I'm very keen that we see further development of, and I think there's a huge demand for. The SOV questions I'll pass over to John Lawton.
Yeah, I'll keep autonomy to myself, I think. Yeah, I think the SOVs aren't going to look terrifically different. I think what we are going to have or would like to see is, although the British UK PLC SOV will have been built here, it's trying to bring in what's inside it as well. So the engine manufacture, your radars, your gangways, that we can bring those, our batteries, our ammonia, can be brought into the market in the UK, rather than us saying that we've got this ship with everything comes from everywhere else. So it's trying to reduce that supply chain into the UK.
Yeah, and I'll just add on top of that, I think one of the big opportunities, and actually with big disruption, sometimes comes a bit of an opportunity in that no one is market leading necessarily in this at the moment. So new propulsion technologies, new fuels, there is a big opportunity to be ahead on things like standards. I think we talked about earlier this important skills to just shipbuilding. So we've got real strength in engineering and designing in the UK, and understanding how those propulsion technologies can be integrated, I think is a really big opportunity for the UK, and I think they will look greener and greener moving forward. Greener's a bit of a catch-all term, but that making sure that we're ahead on those types of things, I think does offer us a significant market opportunity in maritime. Not just for SOVs, same is true of CTVs and beyond offshore wind vessels.
And absolutely, Lauren, I completely agree for the NSO as well, sort of relatively new to this area and absolutely reliant on all the experts on the panel. But for us too, we recognise that this is a really time-limited opportunity for the UK to get in here, and that there are many European and global competitors as well. We also know that there are really obvious first-in-class hurdles for shipyards as well, that there will be challenges over cost deltas that we'll have to explore and understand, but that there is a real opportunity here around potentially that zero emission opportunities, the opportunity that we spoke about in regard to ZEVI funding as well, and exploring how we can use that and access that with Department for Transport colleagues running that competition. So absolutely agree about identifying the unique selling point for the UK and what the panel have said already on the opportunities. So the next question I think I'd picked before this went off again is, should the UK have some kind of Jones Act, which I think will limit to offshore? I mean, I will answer first off to give you time to think about, but I will set my stall out and say probably the answer is no. That I'd be interested in anyone in the room, though, that sort of does have the opinion that it should. But over the years that I've done maritime, I've found that most of the time people tell you that level of protectionism is not conducive and is not really the way that the UK should go. But I can see already one of my own SEG panel members is dissenting from that, so maybe I'm wrong on that. We'll see in the future. But anybody else like to comment on that?
Laura gave me the microphone. No. what we need is a level playing field, that we are competing with the rest of Europe particularly. You go build an SOV in the United States or Canada, and there's some guys in the room who are doing that, and it's costing them 100% more. So your $100 million vessel is costing you $200 million because of the Jones Act. So what we need to do is make sure that when we're building here, we've got a level playing field.
I will, slight cop-out answer here. I'm not going to comment on the specifics of anything like that, but one of the things I would just say, and I think again, sorry, I'm quoting you constantly here, Ken, but there is significant export opportunities. You know, the UK market itself isn't massive. America is obviously a much bigger market, and therefore can deal with some of these things a little bit more internally. I do think we need to be careful, although there is UK content, UK supply chain plans, that we shouldn't view this just as a UK opportunity. I think there's significant export opportunity for these vessels as well.
Thank you. And I mean, just to add that, I don't think a Jones Act is the solution, but I do think there are other things that need to be put in place to support the sector. So support infrastructure is one that's, you know, going to be a huge barrier in terms of the growth of the sector overall, and my expectation would be that's a challenge for shipbuilding as well. I think making sure there's a level playing field globally in terms of investment, and making sure that there's incentives for investment. We touched on you know, foreign investment on one of the previous speakers, and I think, you know, in terms of some of the manufacturing opportunities for the sector, we do need to make sure that the right incentives are in place to make sure that we're bringing in the large-scale investment that's needed for the manufacturing side as well as for the rest of the sector. So there's definitely things that I think structurally need to be done. And there's, you know, overall the sector has driven costs down very, very, very rapidly. The auction process has been incredibly effective at pushing prices down to below £40 a megawatt hour, from, you know, above £150, you know, kind of 10 years ago or less. That's been incredibly effective. What it's done though is squeeze the supply chain, and that's probably gone too far. And I think there needs to be discussions about actually other non-price criteria in those auctions, which would give a bit of headroom for the supply chain to actually make the investments that are needed. So not a Jones Act, but probably some other things I'd be more than happy to suggest.
Thanks very much. I think probably we've already touched on this next question quite heavily, but I'll ask it and see whether there are any further thoughts. So as we were sort of covering in presentations, the UK's already had great success in the CTV market. Any thoughts that the panel have on replicating that in the SOV market as well?
Yeah, a couple of things there. So first and foremost, obviously, we talked about the daughtercraft market. So I think quite directly that CTV market success could translate into the SOV market. You know, the same companies could supply, and I know that's something John's been looking at as part of this project as well. And then I think the only other thing I would add on top of that is that there's some quite bespoke solutions coming out now. I think they're working very well with customers. You have talked about understanding the customer need and then building both locally and quickly, so understanding the rate of the opportunity. So I think the CTV market industry engagement, it has been really, really good at understanding the needs and operation of the vessel. So engage and collaborate, I think, is the main thing I would say on that. What else?
I think the CTV market, though, is strong. It could be much stronger. We are still building far too many CTVs overseas to service the requirement in UK and Europe. With SOVs, again, I think it's probably the first thing will happen is when one of us puts an order in and we see where we end up. As far as our joint venture is concerned, that'll be probably the middle towards the end of next year when we've come down to a design of an SOV, etc., and the costing has got to be right. We have got quite a big checkbook, but we haven't got, it's not unlimited, and it's about that level playing field again. But I think there's an enormous ambition and opportunity to get the UK building these vessels.
Thank you. I'll give you all a brief pause and try and just fudge an answer to one of the other questions very quickly to prove that I'm prepared to do it. So one of the questions is, Clean Maritime regularly mentions zero emissions and decarbonisation, but what strategies and focus is there on maritime marine industry's environmental impacts on the oceans themselves? And I'm just going to take the hit for the team and say I should really remember this from my former Deputy Director DFT days, but I do know that there are significant amounts of strategies around the blue ocean and the ocean environment that particularly DEFRA and the FCDO were in the lead for. So I'm going to answer that one and not subject it to the next panels or anything like that, but I know that if you Google it, there's a great body of work around protecting our oceans, and hopefully that is common knowledge to most in the room as well. So there you go. I've taken that one for the team. I'm also not asking you the question that I don't understand, so I'm trying to be well behaved. So we've probably got time for one final question, and then we'll wrap up. And back to you, John, for the final word potentially, which is back to your sort of confidence levels in Scotland and Scottish content requirements and the current infrastructure here in Scotland, and whether you think that we should be looking at that wider UK infrastructure support.
From a company point of view, we've committed to Scotland. I think from a personal UK point of view, it should be a UK market, absolutely. But we've made that commitment, so we will abide by that. I've got no doubt we'll be able to do it as well. But yeah, it should be a UK PLC market.
Thanks very much, John. Thank you, Andy, John, and Lauren. Hopefully that was a really good session and a good discussion from the panel. Apologies if there were questions. I'm definitely getting the evil eye, and I'm a Reading FC fan, so I'm fairly used to yellow cards. But you know, I'm gonna quit the stage. I'll see you after, Chris, and we'll make sure your questions are answered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, just 1 second, if I may. A couple of key points came out that for me, and I hope this isn't granny suck eggs, but the other aspect of this is we work very closely with the Auric catapult on the tidal side as well and get fantastic service from them. But there are other catapults, aren't there? Manufacturing catapults, and it's something that I don't think we all take advantage of, and I think we should look to the other catapults because they can provide the same excellent service you've seen here. And I thought the whole presentation was illuminating. Q&A was excellent and pretty short, sharp answers as well. And yeah, Reading fans, definitely yellow cards. But traditionally, can we give them a big round of applause, please? That was excellent. Thank you very much.